Right, so the dust has settled a little bit from the local elections, and whilst the rest of the media now turns its attention to a man in a chair having a hat put on his head, no less. This is what passes for the big news today, or rather, what should be passing for news, and certainly is on social media, is the crazy abuse of new police powers being used against anyone seemingly daring to utter the words, "Not my king," or be caught with a placard in their hands. Dominates social media at the moment, as it is, and rightly should be. Regular viewers will know I'll be certainly coming back to that in another video. Really, the analysis of yesterday's local elections begins now with all the results pretty much in now. The biggest story out of all of this, obviously, has to be the collapse of the Tories, which I'm sure everybody who regularly watches my channel can agree we absolutely love to see. First off, a special mention for the far right, though. UKIP were completely wiped out. Hooray! They lost every last one of their remaining 25 councillors. Filling their void over the last several years, however, has been the Brexit Party, now renamed Reform UK, the personal plaything of Talk TV's permatanned, permagrinning Richard Tice. And they did indeed pick up councillors themselves. Did they suck up all of the UKIP vote? No. They've got 6 councillors completely. They're really, well, that's quite an investment for Richard Tice now, isn't it? Did the Tories suck up the majority of those UKIP votes, though? Well, they've been losing more than they've been winning. Certainly more likely it is a sign that this country, on the whole, actually rejects the, I don't know, rampant xenophobia on show. Perhaps we are actually better than that from all of these parties. And perhaps that's why, from an already low point going into this year's locals, the Tories did even worse than even they expected. They know the crack when they're in power, of course, because every government we elect only ever seems to serve themselves once in power. They start to lose support the minute they're elected for the first time. And so they set expectations for things like this. And then if they don't do quite as badly, they can then spin it as a good result instead. So you'd think if they bothered to put people first, they'd secure themselves in post better by doing things that visibly benefit us, and they wouldn't have to play games like this. But of course, too many of them are in it first and foremost for the money and the expenses and the power and the prestige, but also their own post-politics future, having made the right contacts and moved on. How many of these parliamentarians you look at in government can you honestly point to and cite them as being there for entirely altruistic reasons? Very, very few. Anyway, the Tories and their expectation management. They said they expected to lose around 1,000 seats. So really, they were expecting to lose several hundred, went higher, and then they hoped to spin it as a success story, like I said. They got it completely wrong, though. They passed the 1,000 mark in losses and then some. They lost control of 48 councils, more than half of what they started with at the beginning of the day that were up for grabs. And with one council still to declare at time of writing, it's been little short of catastrophic for the Tories. And Rishi Sunak in particular, charged with turning the party's fortunes around as he has been after Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. These results, as I pointed out a moment ago, imply a rejection on the whole of the xenophobia and hard-right politics still present in the Tory party. So to maintain his grip on his own position, a weakling like Rishi Sunak has ended up in a position whereby he is entirely beholden to his more extreme factions, the Suella Bravermans, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Lee Andersons, 30p Lee. And although he's tried to act tough on extreme views by expelling the likes of Andrew Bridgen, for example, quite recently over his vaccine conspiracy theorisms, he was ultimately just background noise, small fry, and dealing with him as an example of being tough was pretty much just for show. The extremism of previous Tory administrations that ended last year have basically carried on under Sunak, just with a new pearly white smile, trousers that are incredibly too short for a man of his diminutive stature. I don't quite know how he manages that one. But also there is a view that the corruption has continued with him too, with Sunak himself embroiled in allegations of making government policy to benefit himself personally through either his own or his wife's alleged business dealings and connections, several of which have come up, from Moderna to Infosys to the most recent child-minding story concerning Koru kids. Now, as much as it can be argued these are national stories and not really relevant to what the local elections are supposed to be about, potholes don't fill front pages. And so inevitably national stories, national government, national media, therefore still carry on with these kinds of a story. So they influence the thinking of people going to these local elections right now anyway. And it's partly why Labour went all in with those attack ads on Sunak as well. They knew national picture thinking was a large part of what influences local election voters. And they went on a campaign talking about nothing but that, along with what they would have done if they had been in power at this moment in time, but weren't, like, freezing council tax. Nonsense, frankly. I'll cover the Labour side of things more in my next video, though. But watch this one first. I know you can't wait to get to that one, but just slow your roll. But inevitably, with such huge losses, the Tory blame game has to start. And the buck stops with Sunak, ultimately. Now, he can argue it's going to take longer to try and turn their fortunes around. He hasn't been in very long, in the grand scheme of things. That's why he's penciled in the next general election at the end of next year as well. So it leaves it as late as possible, gives him as much time as he can to hopefully make some changes and do that. But his case won't be helped with results like this, as bad as this. And with his security on power as fragile as it is, reliant on these alliances within his backbenches, it's not a comfortable place for him to be. Now, of course, he would have known all of this. He knew the results were going to be rubbish. We all knew in large part that this was going to be a very anti-Tory set of elections. And even though things have been worse for them than even they expected, it could have been so much worse if these had been held sort of last October time when Labour were well over 30 points ahead in the polls. Starmer's lead, even over this Tory administration after 13 years of them, austerity, the pandemic, Brexit balls-ups, the cost of living crisis going on even now that we're still enduring. They really ought to be relieved the opposition is led by a man so disliked by the general public that even with their Tory track record of horrificness and failure, the gap has still closed since. And the Tories didn't face what could have been much closer to total oblivion in these elections. So Sunak owes Starmer a favour for that. Sunak is also still, as I said, relatively recent to the job. This is his first big test at election level, but despite that, he still has the ability to blame Boris Johnson and his Truss for these losses. It's something that the Tories said they were going to do before they went into these elections, and is absolutely something they're going to be doing now. And you can argue he's not entirely wrong to do that. If he's looking at the same stats come next year's local elections next May, he won't be able to fall back on that, though. Still, this is the Tory party we're talking about, and these results are enough for some of the most batshit on his backbenches to start muttering about dissent and a desire to bring back Boris again, the very man who ramped the corruption up, whose actions put Labour ahead in the polls, a poll lead accelerated under Truss, of course, but hey, they think he's the answer because he won the last general election against someone like Starmer. Who knows, maybe he still could. After everything he's done, perhaps that is actually possible. As our elections descend more and more into a popularity contest, though as dislikable as Starmer is, it would make our government look like an absolute circus to see that buffoon bozo return to the top job. The Tories functionally have been playing musical chairs for long enough during the last years of this administration. Tory campaigners have complained about Sunak's complacency, not hearing what they are on the doorstep. The Sunak, of course, his seat is as safe as safe can be. He doesn't really go out campaigning. He doesn't need to. He doesn't listen to ordinary people because he doesn't speak to them and doesn't hang out with them. And that tin-earedness showed when he boosted the local electrical grid at his own expense to suit himself and heat his own swimming pool. But ultimately, the starkest fact that will be ringing in the ears of Sunak's allies right now will be one very salient, very simple fact. Yesterday, some of the seats Sunak lost, Theresa May had managed to hold on to back in 2019. He's now officially weaker than she was. That can't be a comfortable seat to be sat in. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe, leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.